Here's how Justin feels about his murder. He's very upset.
Here's how I believe, with all of my knowledge of Justin, here's how I believe he would have felt about it.
Objection, Your Honor. AI cannot speak for the deceased.
Welcome to the AI argument.
Hello and welcome to the AI argument with myself, Justin Connery, joined as ever by Frank Prendergast and our amazing intro music, courtesy of Suno. Welcome, Frank. How's your week going?
Very good, very good. I was actually at the Dublin AI Summit organised by William Fry during the week. That was a lot of fun. Barry Scannell, who's like, we've mentioned him a load of times on the show. He works for William Fry. He was one of the main organisers, and he was joking at one point, saying that he was trying to explain to his kids that this was like his Christmas. And the moderator of the panel was like, Barry, that's a bit sad. And he was like, no, it's not. No, I totally get what he means. It was it was a lot of fun to be there. I'm still processing everything. There was a lot of panels. So there was a lot of really interesting people speaking. But because it was panels, it was quite dense, and I have pages of notes that I have to go through. I think for me, one of the interesting things was, and I'm actually I'm putting together a blog post on this at the moment, but like, I was really interested to see what the general like mood would be around the AI Act and things, especially because like William Fry is probably and Barry Scannell in particular, probably one of my primary sources on information about the EU AI Act. And so it was interesting because we had Niamh Smith was there, who's Ireland's Minister for State for Trade Promotion, Artificial Intelligence and Digital Transformation. She gave a kind of an opening address, and then Michael McGrath, the EU Justice Commissioner, had done like a pre-recorded video. And so they were both kind of like just short little addresses, I suppose, to the crowd, and they mentioned the AI Act. And just in general, we're very positive about Ireland's role and about the fact that the Act would be nurturing innovation, basically, and also like Michael McGrath had a really interesting quote where I think he said, "Europeans need to trust AI for it to thrive," which I thought was a really good quote and very much in line with
How did they say it was going to nurture innovation?
This is the thing. I mean, these were short addresses, and so the nitty-gritty of how this was going to attract talent and nurture innovation was not really gone into in any great detail. And I would have loved some more, deeper insights. But these were short addresses. But it was just interesting, the optimism, the positivity, everything. Now,
but look at regulation is famous for spurring innovation and generating loads of jobs. So I mean, we can all look forward to a glorious future of.
So I know you were being facetious, but I mean, there are papers out there that would support that theory. So, but we won't get into that now because that would be the whole episode. But I will say that Cathal Ryan, the Deputy Commissioner at the Data Protection Commission, was also there, and he had a bit longer because it was a fireside chat with him. And so, obviously he was coming at it from a very specific viewpoint, obviously, because they are one of 9 bodies who are looking after the kind of the fundamental rights area of the EU AI Act. And they're also one of 8 other bodies who are kind of looking at the more market surveillance side, which is a term I hadn't heard of before, but that's basically, making sure that the companies making the product are adhering to the rules, etc.
Yes.
And so he was a bit more measured because he was coming at it from kind of like, this is what we're doing on the ground. And he's only one like slice of the pie, if you like, obviously, but he was very much saying like, we have a lot of work ahead of us. And not that he was negative or anything, but it was just, it was maybe a little bit more a little bit more measured,
grounded, perhaps.
Yeah, exactly. And he did stress the need as well for them to watch for harms at a societal level, which it was just, again, it was just a small little statement that he made, but I just thought it was kind of reassuring to hear, as well as the positivity that there was, there are people kind of going, yeah, this could be societally, there could be problems. We need to watch out for those and guard against them. And the very last thing,
yes, go on.
Well, the very last thing that I found interesting then was I would have there was no audience Q&A, and if there had been, the question I would have asked Michael McGrath would have been like, well, what is it like dealing with the pressure internationally, in terms of particularly, say, the US very much taking the opinion that we should be abandoning our kind of regulatory stance, and removing barriers to adoption, etc. But that wasn't asked of him. However, it did kind of come out in little hints here and there. So one of the guys from Microsoft pointed to a speech by the president of Microsoft,
Mm-hmm.
and the guy on the panel just mentioned that we are in a rather volatile time internationally. Uh,
Sure.
Pointed to Brad Smith's. He's told us to go and look up Brad Smith's speech, and I did. And that speech is fascinating because it's very overt, and he says that there is, and this is like an unparalleled moment of kind of a turbulent situation across the Atlantic. And it was all about Microsoft's commitments to Europe. So it was just interesting that that was hinted at the event. And then Barry Scannell himself also mentioned, the fact that he said that, he was talking about GDPR and how GDPR became like an international gold standard. And we're not seeing that same, what he called Brussels effect, with the EU AI Act. And in fact, we're seeing the opposite. We're seeing resistance to it. And we're seeing how it's like slowing down rollout into Europe. And
Yeah, not surprising though, because I mean, okay,
yeah.
one, I thought GDPR was being rolled back. It was they were sort of doing a bonfire of the regulations in Europe at the moment, and the other thing is there's no security implication with GDPR. Like, there's no national security at stake. So when GDPR, you're protecting your individual's right to privacy and so on and whatever. If that's what you want. That's cool. But when it comes to AI and that stuff, you're literally talking about the future of robotics, the economy, wars, power. It's not just
Mm.
about your personal privacy. So you're just not going to get the same level of agreement. And a quick question for you. Go on. You seem like you disagree with me.
Well, it's
Never
not.
good.
I wouldn't say it's that I disagree with you. I would say that it's, the somebody referenced at the event. They referenced that the GDPR, which previously was like a big, one of the biggest kind of regulatory acts, or whatever you want to call it, like, was going to become the little brother to the EU AI Act. And again, like Michael McGrath's comments about like how much work is involved in getting to where we want to be, are all relevant to what you're talking about. I think, in that, like, it is a much bigger deal. And so I personally think that, like, globally, people should be looking at what the EU is doing and getting behind it, and kind of saying, well, if GDPR became the gold standard for this, we should be being even more stringent when it comes to AI development and integration.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's kind of like, do I want a room of lawyers to decide? It's almost like, it's a bit of a busman's holiday for them. It's like, oh, a lot of technology, big money, best have lots of laws around that now, said a room of lawyers once. Of course they're going to say that. You know, they're the wrong people, right? You need to have, um, you know, technical people in the room deciding how you're not, have the lawyers there to protect the companies and protect individuals, but they're not the people who are. And this idea
But
that we can regulate our way to a safe AI future, when no other, when China isn't going to do it, Russia isn't going to do it, America isn't going to do it. It's a bit like, you know, it's a bit like a small country becoming the greenest country in the world, the planet. It doesn't matter if you're doing the right thing if every other country on the planet doesn't do the right thing. So
but that's why I would have hoped, and I realized that it was a hope, but I would have hoped that we could lead the way, and that others would see the. I mean, I actually believe that I think I'm pretty sure I heard that China actually have very stringent regulations around AI, and so
I'd say they're
really
I'd say the
right now.
regulation reads something like this: must beat America. I'd say it's the most stringent regulation they have around AI. Must beat America, must be very good at spying on my own people. Those are the two most stringent regulations. We're going to get to that actually, because I have a story lined up to talk about that. But Liz, one other question about the lawyers. Did they speak about my favorite AI law? I bet you they didn't, which is, did they speak about when AI is going to replace judges?
No, they didn't. Although they did make several. Did make several comments about how quickly it was going to replace them, or how much of their work it was certainly that it was going to replace.
Did they actually, as a matter of interest, right? Because I do think there's a really valid use case. I'd be very interested to hear if this was discussed. So let's say I'm doing a contract with you, right? And at the moment, the law, like we are the ones writing the contract, so we can agree whatever we want, right? We could, in certain instances, decide that we're going to have an AI arbitrate any issue that we have and agree to be grounded by that. And if we write that into our contract, well, then legally we now have an AI judge. We've just agreed it between ourselves. Did any of the, I mean, and that seems like a really good, cheap, if you had a deal where, if there was a disagreement, it needed to be arbitrated quickly and fairly cheaply, this would seem like a good way to do it. Was there any sort of conversations around innovations in the legal sphere in that sort of regard?
Not in that way, no, because the event was much more. The event was less looking at kind of potential futures and much more looking at where are we now and what do companies need to do in order to integrate safely and within the law. And so that no, that didn't really come up. I mean, one thing around that came up, I suppose, was that there was a quote from Barry Scannell where he said something like. They have a golden rule within William Fry that you should never ask AI about something that you don't know the answer to, which I thought was really interesting because again, it's something that I'm constantly saying about like be the expert. The user has to be able to validate or verify the output in some way. And so what you're talking about, I think you'd be getting into dangerous territory. And this might be something that we end up talking about in a minute in relation to one of your other stories that caught your eye
Yeah,
because 90% of the time or 96% of the time you might be okay, but the 4% of the time it hallucinates. You're not going to know whether your contract is sound or whether you've just put in a hallucination into your contract.
brilliant. Well, let's just use that as a fantastic summary for a new segment we have on the show. Good week, bad week. I've called this particular segment. So we're gonna talk about hallucinations because everybody gets upset about hallucinations, and we've had story after story after story, and it just annoys me because hallucinations are a facet of bad engineering, and it's a bug, not a feature, right? Yes, it is, Frank. Yes, it is. So it is. It has been a bad week for Meta. Meta, I mean, we're still waiting for them to release their new Llama model. Their models aren't scoring particularly well on the different benchmarks. And this week they're being sued for $5 million by a guy called Robert Starbuck. So unfortunately for Robert Starbuck and soon for Meta, it somehow has hallucinated that Robert Starbuck was involved in the January 6 riots on Capitol Hill a couple of years back, which he wasn't. And he told them about this, and the models continued to hallucinate about this. And now he's suing them for $5 million. I'd love to know how it even got to that hallucination, and also how Meta didn't solve it. Bad week for Meta. Good week, however, on the other side for Google, who are just kicking it out of the park still when it comes to AI. So Ethan Mollick had a post, and he got the whole book of War and Peace, which I think was 860,000 tokens. So nearly the full context window of a million tokens. I think maybe it's even 2 million tokens at this point. And in the middle of it, book 14, chapter 10, he put in a line that said, this spoke to Crabman, the superhero, right? Not even a line, a half a line. And then he asked the model to pick out the erroneous text, and it did it every single time. So
Mhm.
Google Gemini 2.5 does not hallucinate. It's really good at understanding context and so on. You can engineer that. I'm absolutely go on.
I'm totally going to push back on you on that because I mean,
Yeah,
look, we don't understand hallucinations fully. That's the first thing. But I would say that like a lot of people certainly believe that hallucinations are much more likely to occur when the model has a gap in its knowledge and is trying to fill that gap and is trying to please you. And it goes back in a way to the sycophancy that we've been talking about so much lately.
yeah,
And so inserting a line in War and Peace, if War and Peace is in the training, which I've no doubt it is, then identifying that I don't think would be a massive issue. But I still think hallucinations, we see it. I was reading somewhere during the week some statistics about how low they are, and they tend to be now in the single digits, like
Low single
depending,
digits, less than one
like
percent.
well, I was reading somewhere more between, like, it could be anywhere between 1.5 and 6%, depending on the model. It was in that kind
Yep.
of region. But the thing is that those benchmarks are based on very simple tasks, like things like summarization. And so we don't, it's very, how do you measure, how do you really measure the extent of hallucination? And if you think about it at the model size, in terms of a model being out in the world, then a 4 to 6% hallucination rate, that becomes a lot of people, like the gentleman you mentioned, being affected by completely erroneous information about them. I'm
I think
glad
it's
he's suing.
I'm glad he's suing too, because I think Mark Zuckerberg's gone mad after his madness last week with everybody having a demand for 15 friends. I think he's a lunatic. um, but where I'm going with this is that
Mm.
as the context windows get bigger and bigger and bigger, and they do other benchmarks too, they do the needle in a haystack where they ask it to pick a specific piece of information out of the context window, and they produce these beautiful graphs where you can see now that again Gemini 2.5 is perfect at the needle in the haystack test. And so for the mission critical type of applications that you're talking about, where 100% accuracy is the absolute requirement, well then as a designer, what you would do is just get the information. So let's say it's a procedure or it's a manual or it's a whatever it happens to be, a regulation. You just put that entire thing into the context window and then you just talk to it. So, before you would have had issues where you're relying on the model, right? And that's where you get a hallucination, or you're relying on a RAG pattern. So retrieval, you're trying to retrieve the data and then hope that you get the right information in order to answer the question. What I'm saying to you is the golden rules of AI are it gets 90% cheaper every 12 months and they get twice as capable every 12 months. And the context windows are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Just throw all your data into the context window and then talk to your data. That's it. It's an engineering problem and it's solved.
So, and it's solved is the bit that I have an issue with. I mean, I think anyone implementing should be aware that they should look at the benchmarks, realize that the benchmarks are only looking at hallucinations within a very narrow window. And then you'd have to kind of say, well, okay, so this model hallucinates at a rate of, at a minimum, say 2%. And then figure out, is it acceptable to have a 2% hallucination rate in whatever task that you're doing. And for some tasks, sure, it doesn't it doesn't really matter, but there are tasks out there that you do not want a 2% like total lula hallucination rate going on in.
Dilute. Anyway, go on. Let's go on, right? Lula
Cool.
hallucination. Let's do more good week, bad week, right? It's been a good week, bad week for Windsurf AI, who got bought for 3 billion quid. Bad week if you work for OpenAI and the employees of Windsurf AI because they've abandoned their plans to become a public or for-profit company. So let's just talk a bit because we talked about this before, right? So Windsurf AI are a company that make a thing called an IDE, an integrated development environment. So it's a place where you write code, and they pride themselves. It's a bit like Copilot. It's a bit like what's the other one, Cursor. It's a bit like it's another one of these development environments, and they say that they're agentic as well. Whatever agents are the thing of this year. So they got bought by OpenAI for 3 billion quid, and the question is, why did OpenAI buy this company for 3 billion quid? And I think that's a fair question. So if you are in the business of making AI and you've got the best model in the world, or one of the best models in the world, and you believe that in the next 2 or 3 years, you're going to create AGI, artificial general intelligence, and ASI. And Google and these companies are coming out and they're saying 50% of all code in our company is written by AI. By the end of the year, it's going to be 80%. And the implication is that in a year or two, there's going to be no developers. Now, if you truly believed that in a year or two there was going to be no developers, why then would you spend 3 billion quid buying a company that writes software to help developers? Surely the implication is then that you don't believe there's going to be no developers, that actually developers are pretty safe and they're just going to use the tool to help them be better at developing. So it's very interesting. People can say what they want, like in public forums, but when they actually spend 3 billion quid on something, I think that really tells you quite a lot about their underlying beliefs. So that's quite an interesting thing that happened this week.
Yeah, I was thinking about that, and my question, I guess, would be, I feel like OpenAI have moved the goalposts, and we've talked about this a few times. They've moved the goalposts on like what is AGI, because I
Mm,
think a couple of years ago we all had this concept of AGI being, an AI that could be completely autonomous, and that you could pretty much just kind of go, you could pretty much just tell it to do something the way you would a human and let it go off and do it. And
mm.
I think the goalposts have moved now, and AGI is more, people are wondering, oh, is O3 AGI? Well, if the definition of AGI is like more like telling a human to go do something and it does it, then O3 is clearly not AGI. However, if it's an ability to apply knowledge to to the range of tasks that a human could, and the way OpenAI have been defining it recently is, and how much money can it make doing that? Um, then, if you consider that shift in perspective, then are they buying something like Windsurf in order to provide something like O3 with a tool to do the coding in order that it can be profitable by doing the coding using this tool and reducing the need for human intervention?
Interesting. Actually, that wasn't an angle I had thought of. So you're thinking that the person who's going to be doing the coding is actually O3 or O4 or O5 using the IDE to make the code.
It's certainly a question that I'd ask, or that I'd have.
Interesting. Okay, I hadn't considered it because I had kind of assumed that they would. I mean, the other question then is, well, why not just get O3, Doctor Heal Thyself? Why not just get O3 to write windsurf? I mean, famously, Greg Brockman took a photo of a website about a year and a half ago, and then asked, I
Mm.
think it was GPT-4 or something, to write the website, and it just did it, and it created the code and everything. So I'm 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 unconvinced. I think it's really interesting. Part of me is kind of
Yeah.
like OpenAI are trying to eat everybody's lunch. They're trying to. I mean, you had a story this week about Visa saying what did Visa do this week?
Yeah, both Visa and MasterCard have announced AI agents that you'll be able to say, go out and I want pink shoes and I want them to be under $100, and here are the brands I like, and just let it go off and find you a pair of shoes and buy it for you. Now, my understanding is we're not quite there yet, but like, as in, I think you still have to sign off on the final payment, but I'm not entirely sure. But they have put all these like safeguards in place that the agent can use these like special tokens that have those constraints on them, rather than actually using all of your personal credit card details online. They have these special tokens that are sitting under your credit card or something.
Oh,
Um, a little bit over my technical ability
yeah,
to
yeah.
fully understand. So it's early days with it, but yeah, that's the way it's going. And they mentioned like small businesses as well being able to manage procurement, just send the agents out looking for materials at a particular price, etc.
Yeah, it's a great use case. It's a great use case. And OpenAI, of course, put buying stuff and search into their model just last week. So that was kind of, and then they're clearly trying to kill Google in search. So OpenAI are trying to eat everybody's lunch.
Mm.
Um, so that's kind of interesting. An interesting thing that happened this week was Stripes, again related to Visa and Mastercard. Stripe, the payments company set up by the Collision brothers from Limerick, are they? Certainly that
The,
part of the world.
the Collison brothers, yeah.
Collison brothers, not the Collision brothers. Yes, thank you. So they had their big conference. There was loads of famous people there. Johnny Ive was there, Mark Zuckerberg was there, and so on. But actually, the most interesting thing that I saw was they had a tech paper, and they trained a transformer model on transactions. So, what they do to transfer, very quick 101, right? In order to train GPT-4, you get all of the English language, not letter by letter, not word by word, but you break it into tokens, and then you feed the token, you teach the model by feeding these tokens into it, and then it predicts what the next token is going to be. So, they did the same thing, but instead of using English or language, I should say, and words, they used transactions. So they fed all of the transactions, they turned them into tokens, and they fed them into a model. And then what they did was they they used, again, like a RAG application, right, where you do a similarity search. They said, right, well, most transactions are regular, normal transactions. So let's take all those, and the ones that are left then are likely fraudulent transactions. They're outliers. And you can think of these as like payments in high dimensional space, right? It's kind of, they find connections in ways that we don't really even fully understand in many respects. But their fraud detection went from 60% to 99% by using a transformer model, which is
Wow.
incredible. Incredible by using the same technology. So that was interesting and very impressive. The thing that I think was might frighten you this week was a story that we both noticed from a Texan judge, Ray Ferguson, where you had actually more details on it, but there was a man who was murdered, and the perpetrator was
Mm.
found guilty, and the judge allowed an avatar of the deceased person to speak the victim impact statement to the court. Now, the words were words written by his sisters, so it was, instead of her reading out the words, it was his avatar reading out the words. Um, but it was noted in the court that it had a very powerful impact on the judge and on the jury. What's your view on this?
I yeah, I'm not sure about this at all because I mean, they even said that the judge increased um, the sentence. So I think, I think the jury had recommended a sentence, or however it works, and then the victim impact statement came from this AI avatar of the deceased, and the judge actually increased the sentence because, and noted the impact that the statement had made on him when he did that. And I don't know. I think it's slippery slope because, I mean, that's not the victim, and I feel like in a court of law, surely we should be adhering to the factual, not, not this is what the deceased might have said,
We should have
but,
started on this story, you know that. It's not the deceased, it's not his words yet. Right? But can you imagine? Can you imagine a future in the not too distant future? So OpenAI turned on the memory feature all across the world. So in Europe now, everywhere, right? So it's
Hmm.
constantly learning about you. Okay, it knows everything. So imagine you're a host of a podcast, right? And you do a podcast for 5 or 10 years, and you're every week you're talking to your own personal AI about, Frank said this, Justin said this, whatever, and you're getting some details. And so the AI gets to know you more and more and more. And then you have, artistic differences, and in a peak of madness, one podcast host kills the other podcast host, right? You could have, now that AI could actually speak your thoughts, right? And say, oh my God, I thought Frank was my friend. We went on holidays together. We had romantic walks down the beach, and then one day he came back from the pub. He was angry. He was drunk. He attacked me with a knife.
I mean,
I've never been so upset in my life, right? And it would, I mean, at this point, the AIs have already passed the Turing test, right? They're already, I've been fooled by a Twitter account this week, right? But now, not only could it pass the Turing test, but it could not only could it predict the next token as good as a human, but it can predict my next token as good as me, and it becomes indistinguishable almost from me giving the victim impact statement, even though I'm the victim.
you're right. We probably should have started with this because we're right back into the philosophical issues of, what makes us us. Because, I disagree with you in terms of they will never be your words, no matter how close they are or how accurate they are to what you would have said. It's not you. It's an AI trained on your history, your thoughts, whatever. But it can't be you.
Do you
Uh,
think? Do you think, right? So let's take the same thought experiment, right? So you have an AI, it's been there for 5 or 10 years, right? You've been chatting away to it. You and me have a commercial dispute, right? So it's very likely that I've talked to my AI about this commercial dispute, and I've looked at it this way, that way, and the other way, and all sorts of things. Do you think at any point in the future, my personal AI will be allowed to be called as a witness in a court case to be questioned on what I talked to it about? Bet you they didn't discuss this at the William Fry conference.
I think that's much more likely. Like, I think that, in a way, I would have less of a problem with that, because that's we're now going into the territory of AIs. At what point do we actually have to assign them rights, or at what point do we actually have to think of them differently than just purely technology. And I think that will happen. I think that will happen. I think, or at least I think that is very likely to happen, let's say.
And you're okay with that?
Well, it goes back to the big conversation we had about consciousness recently. If they reach a point where we feel like there's any level of consciousness that has to be taken into consideration, then yes, I'm okay with that. Absolutely.
Okay. And
but
then
I
let's
see
take it
that as separate to, where it gets really murky is where an AI avatar has a persistent state of your personality. I mean, then we're at a whole other level of conceptual. It can never be you. There could be an absolute digital twin of you that is able to reach the same types of decisions and express the same types of thoughts as you would, but it's still not you. It's almost more like, I suppose it's more like having an identical twin. Like somebody's identical twin cannot, which is I think that this is a really good analogy for that court case, right? If the deceased person had an identical twin, a real life, actual identical twin, that twin could have given a victim statement as themselves in terms of how it impacted them, their twin having been killed, but they could not give a victim statement posing as the deceased. That would not have been allowed.
That's just a framing question, right? So instead of saying, I am Justin, it's just saying, okay, I'm Justin's digital twin, Justin 2.0. I have the same thoughts of Justin. I'm just a little bit more eloquent, and actually I'm quite a bit smarter. Justin never admitted that, though.
But I think
Here's
that's
how
very
Justin feels. Here's how Justin feels about his murder. He's very upset.
Here's how I believe, with all of my knowledge of Justin, here's how I believe he would have felt about it.
I love objection. Objection, Your Honor. AI cannot speak for the deceased. I love it. An objection never heard before.
You mentioned something just briefly there, which I think would be a good one to close out on. You said you were fooled by a Twitter account, and I am dying to hear more about this.
And again, right, maybe I'm getting old. So a company called Noose Research, right? And we've talked about them a couple of times before. These are smart people, right? So they did, do you remember years ago there was a SETI at home where you could use the spare compute power to search for aliens? They did basically the same thing, but to train a model. So you could do a distributed train. They did that research. They did another research just about 6 months ago where this is when reasoning models were just coming out, and they came up with a way to apply reasoning to any model. So these guys are good, right? They are technically competent. So there was a Twitter account that I've been following for about a year called Technium1, right? And it would just tweet about, AI stuff and whatever, and I had opinions. And actually, in the last couple of weeks, I was about to unfollow it because I didn't particularly like the stories that it was putting out there, and it sort of seemed a bit too opinionated and wasn't really, I didn't jive with it, Frank. I didn't jive with it.
Right.
The head of Noose Research came out this morning and said, this is an agent. It's been running for over 2 years. Nobody ever questioned it. There's not a real person behind this Twitter account.
Wow. And it has 46,000 followers.
46,000 people fooled, right? If you want to talk about the Turing test being passed, there it is. I mean, it was perfect in every way. Beautiful, amazing.
And I think you're obviously pretty early to the story because you were following it. You were following the account, and when you sent it to me, I did some searches and I couldn't find anything about it other than the tweet from the company saying, here's the big reveal. I'm going to be really interested to see if over the coming week this causes a stir or causes controversy, because we saw, with the Reddit last week, we were talking about the secret Reddit experiment that was done by a company who put AI bots into a subreddit without telling anybody. So you're telling me this thing has been running for years and there was nobody behind it. And, because this is exactly what we were talking about last week, that we could all be being fooled by bots right now. And here we are just 1 week later. And we have been fooled by the bots. And how many more of them are out there?
And how many more of them are out there and giving opinions and influencing people and pushing opinions in a certain direction? Like, it's this one has blown me away and has actually shaken me to my core.
I mean, absolutely fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And I'm gonna go off and have a look at that account now. I had a quick look, and I was really impressed at how just human sounding it was, and and it's not just blasting out content the whole time either. It's like
No,
it appears to be in the comments, like in going to other people's content and leaving comments and leaving replies, and
and was giving
yeah,
opinions and that was the reason why, in fact, I just didn't enjoy the opinions that it was giving, but it was still giving opinions, commenting on stories, giving context. As you say, it wasn't just retweeting or splurting out content. It was and do you remember there was another one, Lily Hayward, was it, or something like that? Everybody said that that account was also an AI account. We're going to need a Blade Runner on Twitter, right, to go in and start hunting down and killing the AI bots. We're going to need,
yeah.
yeah.
You're walking on a beach, you see a turtle on its back. What do you do?
Brilliant. Frank, as always, great fun. And yeah, look forward to arguing with you next week.
Excellent stuff. I'll see you next week.
Take it easy.